Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to break down the incredibly complex events, the multi-front battles, and the massive global impacts of the 2026 Iran war. This is a conflict that has fundamentally reshaped borders, alliances, and the global economy in ways we're honestly still trying to fully comprehend.
So we really need to start by asking a pretty fundamental question. How exactly does a decades-long diplomatic feud over nuclear capabilities suddenly explode into a massive, multinational conflict? The kind of conflict that sends economic shockwaves right down to your local gas pump and grocery store. Because this wasn't just an overnight phenomenon. It was the absolute boiling point of deeply entrenched historical grievances. To make sense of this incredibly dense geopolitical puzzle, we're going to follow a pretty straightforward map in this explainer. First, the roots of the conflict. Second, the outbreak and escalation. Third, the regional proxy war. Fourth, those global economic shockwaves I just mentioned. And finally, number 5, a fragile, broken peace.
All right, let's jump right into part 1. Roots of the conflict, decades of tension.
You can't really understand 2026 without rewinding the clock. We're talking over 70 years of escalating tension here. It really kicks off back in 1953 with a US and UK-backed coup that ousted Iran's prime minister over oil nationalization. That specific historical resentment, it was a massive driver for the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which completely severed diplomatic ties and established an Islamic Republic. Fast forward to 2018, the US pulls out of the JCPOA nuclear deal and slaps on a maximum pressure sanctions campaign that absolutely crippled the Iranian currency. By 2025, all that internal pressure boiled over into mass anti-government protests, severe crackdowns, and a brief conflict known as the 12-Day War, which actually saw direct US and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. So going into early 2026, the stage wasn't just set, it was totally rigged to blow.
And at the dead center of all this friction, you have two entirely incompatible realities. On one side, the US and Israel cite intense fears of Iran's nuclear weaponization. They aim for regime change, framing their actions as a necessary response to those harsh crackdowns during the 2025 and 2026 Iranian protests. But then, on the exact opposite side, you have Iran. They assert an absolute sovereign right to civilian nuclear power, framing their actions as self-defense against imperial aggression in what they call the Third Imposed War. Two completely different narratives colliding head-on.
Which brings us to part 2. Outbreak and escalation, the spark.
After some very high-level meetings between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Donald Trump, an absolutely historic military action got the green light. In late February 2026, we saw unprecedented joint airstrikes, codenamed Operation Epic Fury by the US and Operation Roaring Lion by Israel. These strikes targeted and actually killed top Iranian leadership, most notably Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Now, this was literally the match in the powder keg. It was the exact event that ignited the broader war, virtually guaranteeing a massive, immediate response from Iran.
And that immediate response relied heavily on a really fascinating strategic doctrine known as the Mosaic defense. So what is that? Well, when you're up against militaries with overwhelmingly superior conventional and aerial firepower like the US and Israel, you don't meet force with concentrated force. Instead, the Mosaic defense uses a highly decentralized, widespread, asymmetric approach. It's designed to take a localized, targeted strike and turn it into a multi-front regional inferno, basically activating everywhere all at once.
And that is exactly what Iran did with Operation True Promise 4. This wasn't just a single counterattack, guys. It was an absolute barrage. We're talking missiles and drones launched directly at Israel. But they didn't stop there. They struck US-aligned Arab countries, Bahrain, Jordan, Oman, Qatar. They systematically targeted US military and radar bases all over the region to essentially blind Allied forces. And, maybe most importantly for the rest of the world, they moved to blockade the vital Strait of Hormuz, a massive maritime choke point.
So now we hit part 3, the regional proxy war, a multi-front inferno.
Almost immediately, the Iranian-aligned Axis of Resistance Network was activated. Literally 2 days after the initial strikes, Hezbollah jumped in, firing heavy rockets into northern Israel and sparking the grueling 2026 Lebanon war. Down in Yemen, Houthi forces started striking Israel directly while ramping up their attacks on Red Sea shipping. You had the Popular Mobilization Forces attacking out of Iraq. And because the battlefield was expanding so rapidly and violently, US-aligned nations like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait were dragged into the fray, skirmishing with these proxy groups and striking Iranian territory.
The human toll from all of this chaos was just
devastating. We're looking at 17 U.S. military fatalities, 40 Israeli soldiers, and absolutely staggering numbers out of Iran, where estimates range from 1,200 to over 6,000 military deaths, plus thousands more civilian casualties. Hezbollah and other proxy groups also took massive hits, with losses in the thousands. It's crucial to remember that behind every single one of those numbers is a profound human tragedy that has totally shattered communities across West Asia.
And beyond that immense loss of life, the financial reality of a conflict like this is almost hard to wrap your head around. By June 2026 alone, we are talking about a direct cost of $113.3 billion to United States taxpayers. Because a war on this scale, it requires an unbelievable amount of resources, funding everything from massive carrier strike groups to advanced munitions and global logistics.
Which brings us to Part 4, Global Economic Shockwaves. The world feels the impact.
This is where we see how an overseas military conflict practically reaches right into our own homes. When Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz, the world was hit with the largest supply disruption of the global oil market in history. Oil and fuel took a massive 40% hit. That triggered severe fuel crises and actual protests in places as far-flung as Ireland and the Philippines. Natural gas took a heavy blow too. Airspace closures threw global aviation into chaos, and the ripple effects even hammered fertilizer production, which directly spikes your grocery bills, and global tourism. It's a stark reminder of just how interconnected our modern world really is. A strike in West Asia literally shakes the economic foundation everywhere else.
Finally, we arrive at Part 5, a fragile, broken peace, the diplomatic collapse.
Diplomatically, things unraveled incredibly fast. An initial ceasefire in April pretty much faltered immediately. Now, there was a tiny glimmer of hope on June 17th when Presidents Trump and Pezeshkian actually signed the Islamabad Memorandum, which officially lifted the blockades. But, as we know, peace can be incredibly fragile. By July 8th, alleged Iranian strikes on commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz completely shattered that agreement. And less than a week later, on July 14th, the U.S. formally renewed hostilities, notifying Congress and dropping a massive choking naval blockade right back around Iran.
So, where does that leave us? We are staring at a deeply uncertain horizon. With hostilities officially back on, those peace memorandums literally in ashes, and a heavy naval blockade suffocating the region once again, the entire global economy is just holding its breath. And it leaves us with one massive, lingering question. In a landscape utterly defined by decades of mistrust, devastated by unprecedented violence, and locked in the seemingly endless cycle of retaliation, how can this deeply fractured region ever find its way back from the brink? It's definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it helped untangle this complex web for you. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.